With the launch of Chapter 6, of course we had a brand new map with 18 brand new point of interest to explore. So in today's video, we'll dive into this stunning map as we rank every single POI on a tier list ranging from S tier to D tier. Jumping into the video, we have Flooded Frogs. Now this POI is easily one of my favorites of the chapter so far, and it's one of the more charming locations on the map. I absolutely love the little pond in the center of the POI, complete with the frog statue, the soothing frog sounds, and of course the lily pads scattered throughout the pond. Flooded Frogs is one of the most heavily themed areas on the map as well, and it's that kind of location that either clicks with you or it doesn't. Fortunately for me, it absolutely does. In fact, this has been my go-to drop spot for the first week of Chapter 6, so we're kicking off the video with one of my favorite POIs and our first edition in the S tier. Next up, we have Magic Mosses. I've always loved the wooded locations on previous maps, like Weeping Woods and Welling Woods. Honestly, Magic Mosses is enough to stand out from the previous wooded locations that we've seen. The graphics in this biome are absolutely next level, and I love the layout of the POI. There's a central area with a couple of buildings that provide you for a good landing spot and some good loot. And we also have a secret underground spot with this POI that's super cool. And on top of that, Magic Mosses offers some shrines and sprites, making it a great spot for solid loot and setting you up perfectly for the match. So for me, this POI is definitely a standout on the Chapter 6 map, and it earns its spot in A tier. And next up on the list, we have Demon's Dojo. Now this POI is one of the more unique locations on the map. For starters, it's surrounded by snow, which is kind of a rarity on the Chapter 6 map, which makes the POI feel unique. While it does feature the Japanese-inspired design that several POIs on the map share, it's still unique enough to stand out for me, and I think it's one of the better Japanese-inspired POIs on the map. Visually, it is stunning, but what makes it a good drop spot is the mythic boss that spawns at the location. Plus, the shadowy NPC figures that follow you around the location add an eerie atmospheric touch that ties the whole location together. So while it certainly doesn't crack my top 5 POIs for the chapter, Demon's Dojo is still a good POI, so we'll put it in A tier. And moving on, we have Pump Power. Now this is a POI that I only encounter mid-game, and it's not a spot that I'd really land at. It does have a unique theme that stands out from all the other Japanese-inspired architecture that's found all around the map, and the level of detail in the design of the POI is impressive. So I do appreciate the effort that they put into the theming for Pump Power. The layout of the POI is what holds it back for me. The scattered pipes make fights here feel awkward and clunky, which can obviously be frustrating, especially if you play in builds. And on top of that, every time I've landed here, I've always found it hard to find loot, which is definitely not something you want from a drop spot. While I don't dislike Pump Power, it's definitely one of the weaker POIs on the map for me. That said, it's not terrible, so we'll throw it into B tier. And next up, we have Lost Lakes. Now this POI reminds me a lot of Flooded Frogs, which is definitely a good thing. I absolutely love the design of the buildings and the overall layout of the POI. One of my favorite aspects of Lost Lakes is the way that they integrated the lake into the POI. It separates the location into different sections, helping to balance out the number of players that land here and making fights feel more dynamic. And like a lot of other POIs on this map, Lost Lakes has a lot of detail put into it, with my favorite being the face that's in the lake. I honestly have nothing but praise for this POI, so we'll throw it into S. And moving on, we have Twinkle Terrace. This location might be small, but it's packed with a lot of character, which makes it feel unique on the map. One thing I really enjoy about Twinkle Terrace is the multi-level design to the POI. Many of the buildings have upstairs and downstairs areas, which obviously can lead to some interesting and chaotic fights, especially in the endgame. With that said though, I definitely don't find myself wanting to land at this POI, and while I'm certainly a fan, it's not quite a top tier location, so we'll throw it into B tier. And next up, we have Brutal Boxcars. Now this is one of the smaller POIs on the map, and I think that's where most of the shortcomings of the POI come from. There's not a ton of loot or chest spawns here, making it a spot that I always avoid landing at right off the bat. Though the train does have some pretty good loot, so if you're lucky enough for the train to pass through the POI once you land, I guess it could be worth it. The details at the POI, like the spare trains scattered around the area and the workshop where they're stored, bring a nice sense of life and realism to the map. So despite its flaws, Brutal Boxcars still has enough charm to earn a spot in the B tier. And moving on, we have Nightshift Forest. Now this is easily one of the more stunning areas on the map, and that's saying a lot considering how beautiful the colors and the graphics are all throughout the map. I absolutely love the blue and purple color scheme, as it's really vibrant and it adds a lot to the atmosphere for the POI. And it's not just a gorgeous area to look at, it's also a solid spot for looting, making it a good option for a landing spot or for a place to rotate through mid-game. So with the incredible visuals and the practical layout, Nightshift Forest earns a spot in the A tier. And moving on, we have Foxy Floodgate. And this is a POI that I feel like a lot of players often overlook. At first glance, it might just seem like a dam, but it has an interior that you can enter, which is filled with a decent amount of loot and shields. The theming here is really well done, and I honestly think the POI has a lot of charm. But for me, the best part of the POI is the aesthetic, plus having a dam on the map again gives me a sense of nostalgia and reminds me a lot of Chapter 2. So overall, this POI is kind of interesting, as there is a nice interior, but then again, it is a pretty vertical POI, which turns away a lot of players, so I'll throw it into B tier. Now before we move on to the next POI, if you're enjoying the video, make sure you smash that subscribe button, as we're so close to 10K, and only 4% of you watching right now are actually subbed. And use code Twistychase in the Fortnite item shop if you'd like to support me and the channel with your next purchase. And moving on, we have Seaport City. And just like me, I'm sure many of you thought of Mega City when you first saw this POI in the trailers, and I can honestly say the more I play here, the more I like it. At the moment, I still enjoy Mega City a little bit more, but this POI takes a lot of things that worked with Mega City and improves on things that didn't. For example, one of the things that sets Seaport City apart is the buildings here actually have interiors, which is something that Mega City was lacking back in Chapter 4. You can also hop on the train for some good rotation and also loot the chest if it's still there. So as you can probably tell, I love big POIs that bring us constant action, and Seaport City definitely delivers. So for that reason, I'll throw Seaport City into S tier. And moving on, we have one of the more interesting POIs with Shining Span, as this location is quite literally just a bridge, nothing more, nothing less. I'm a bit confused as to why Epic Games decided to make this a POI on the map rather than just a landmark. So because the POI is so simple, it's definitely on the lower end of the list for me, so we'll throw it into C tier. And moving on, we have Warrior's Watch. Now this is probably my least favorite of the Japanese themed POIs, mainly because it feels like it offers the least variety of them all. The loot variety here also feels off, as the vast majority of the chest spawns are here in the center building. Though I will admit, I do like the vibe that this POI gives off, so we'll throw it into B tier. And next up on the list, we have BURD. Now gas stations are always a fun landmark to have on the map, but I'm honestly surprised that BURD is a named POI. Now given that this POI is pretty small, the loot isn't the best here, but the charm of the POI comes from the theming of the gas station itself. It's a simple but effective POI with enough charm to make it a solid landing spot, so we'll throw it into B tier. Moving on, we have Canyon Crossing. Now this is a POI that I also feel a lot of the player base is overlooking, because in my opinion, this is one of the most unique and coolest looking POIs that Epic Games have ever produced. Overall, the layout and building designs here really resonate with me, making it a standout on the map, so we'll throw it into S tier. Next up, we have Meadows. Now from the moment I saw this POI on the leaked map, I thought it looked fairly similar to Pleasant Park, and to be honest, I was kinda right. This POI straight up feels like they took the vibe and the layout from Pleasant Park and applied it to the Chapter 6 map, but with a cool Japanese theme. I'm a huge fan of residential POIs in Fortnite, and since Pleasant Park is my favorite POI to ever exist, I'll admit I am a bit biased in how much I'm enjoying Meadows. So overall, Meadows is definitely in my top 3 point of interest for Chapter 6, so we'll throw it into S tier. And moving on, we have Hopeful Height. Now the majority of the praises that I had for Meadows apply here to Hopeful Heights, as it's pretty much the same type of POI with a lot of residential aspects, it's just a bit smaller. But regardless, I still really enjoy Hopeful Heights, so I'll throw it into A tier. And moving on, we have Shoguns Solitude. Now this POI is one of the most visually stunning points of interest on the map, with a very nice mix of red trees that look absolutely beautiful in game. More than anything though, I just love the vibe of this POI, and I really enjoy the layout. I'm gonna have to throw it into A tier. And next up, we have Whiffy Wharf. This was actually my first drop spot of Chapter 6. I love the boardwalk vibe that this POI gives off, with restaurants and shops being scattered throughout, and of course it's built right over the water. I really enjoy the POIs that give off beach vibe, and in some ways, this POI reminds me a lot of Sweaty Sands from Chapter 2. So sure, the POI is a bit small, and the buildings on it aren't the biggest, but there's so much character and detail packed into this tiny space that I have to throw it into A tier. So if you can't already tell, I'm a pretty big fan of this entire map, with the lowest ranked POIs landing in C tier, and most of them being an A and B. But be sure you let me know your rankings in the comments below. Did I place your favorite POI in the same tier that you would, or do you disagree? But as always, until next time, take care and stay twisty.